Welcome to Seminary Dropout, interviews with leading theologians, biblical scholars, leaders, and thinkers, asking questions and having conversations that help us better understand God and ourselves. For believers and doubters alike, let's go. My guest today is Dr. Beth Felker Jones. Dr. Jones, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Glad to be with you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who don't know?
Sure thing. So I'm Dr. Beth Jones. The Felker is there in print, so it makes it easier to Google me. Also my maiden name. I have a PhD in theology from Duke University, and I teach theology at Northern Seminary, which is near Chicago. But as Shane will tell you, you can be a student there and live anywhere that you can log in on Zoom. So we have students from all over the place. I teach basic theology classes, but also stuff about gender, stuff about bodies, and whatever else we need in the curriculum at the moment. And I live near the seminary in Chicago with my husband. We have 4 kids who are in various stages of being almost grown now, a couple of dogs, and a very fluffy cat who sometimes shows up on my socials. His name is Dwight, and he is my theology cat.
And if people follow your Substack, they'll get to know Dwight a lot. Or your socials. He's on there a lot. He's a big star.
He's a ham. He likes to show up. He's much easier to photograph than the dogs. So that's really his origin as the theology cat. No.
I was just thinking this. You were actually the first, how do I say this? You're the first of my seminary professors that I've interviewed while being enrolled. So,
that's fun.
Yeah. You know, I had Matt Bates on a long time ago before I was at Northern and a few, Nijay and all those. But so this is really fun for me.
Fun for me too. Yeah. I'm so glad you're at Northern now, and great colleagues, right?
Oh my gosh. It's so great. I love it so much. And I was thinking about this, Dr. Jones.
Me too.
I was, I think I made it to my 3rd quarter at Northern before I had a male professor at Northern, which I think is amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
Well played. Yeah.
I know. Well, and
I can't tell you how often someone tells me I'm the first female professor they've ever had, especially in theology or religion. So, yeah.
Which is like, sad and beautiful at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were... I've taken, except for my first quarter, I've taken 2 classes at a time. But that first one, I was kind of like, I'm going to dip my toes into this and make sure it's not overwhelming and just going to do one at a time. But yours was my very first class, Theology 1. And I couldn't think of a better intro into, seminary itself, but also Northern. It was just a wonderful experience. And I've become really good friends with some of the people in that first class as well that we still keep in touch with. So still got those text threads going and stuff like that.
That does my heart good. I hope those text threads are going so you all can keep supporting each other. Oh.
It's been amazing. I did not expect that. I thought, especially, being a distance person, this is going to be it's not going to be a traditional experience. And of course it's not in a lot of ways, but making friends with my classmates was really a bit of beautiful surprise. I love it. So, I'm doing a little partnership with Seminary now, and as soon as that came about, I thought, well, I want to interview Dr. Jones because I've wanted to have you on for a really long time. This podcast is so far from regular at this point. It's whenever I have a moment to interview someone. So you've been on the list for a long time that I've really wanted to talk to. And I started digging into the Seminary Now library. I thought you might have a few classes, but you have one up. That is...
There's another appearing soon, but yeah.
There is? Okay, I was going to ask about that. So, because, there's a lot that would be great to hear from you from. And so, but the one that's on now is, and I don't even know the proper title of it. What is it like?
I believe
Christian
it's
Theology
called, Faithful, a Christian Theology of Sex. Or maybe it's just called a Christian Theology of Sex. It's about sex in any case.
Yes. So... I have a feeling that although you're PhD thesis wasn't directly about sexuality. It's my understanding. It was about the body, right?
That's
So I
right.
would assume that that really informed a lot of what came from this and your subsequent book.
Yeah, I mean, the body has been central to what I've been interested in theologically since my graduate work and my dissertation. And sort of naively, I think I didn't expect that to necessarily lead into teaching or writing about sex. But of course, it naturally does. And a few years back now, a colleague asked me if I would write this little book about a theology of sex, and the Seminary Now course is based on that book. So.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So I took the course myself, and one of the things, I think the first thing that I noticed was that your starting point is that sex is good and that all the positive things that come from it. And I think that especially those that grew up in church, like that was not the starting point of talking about sex. Why did you think that that was important?
Yeah. So I think this book really was shaped by my years of undergraduate teaching. It might be shaped differently now that I teach primarily at the seminary level, but I've had lots and lots of conversations with mostly grew up in church young people about sex. And a lot of them have hangups, right? They think sex is kind of dirty and disgusting and gross and evil and scary. And whether they're actively engaged in such activities or not, they often have a lot of shame attached. But also theologically speaking, right? All that God has made is good. And I think it's pretty clear in the scriptures that that includes the joys of bodily life, the joys of sexuality.
Well, one of the, I think that this was the very first kind of the intro video in the course where you can compare sex to food. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's like, those are the perfect, those two really go together because one, they have to do with the body.
Right.
And they also have to do with like these really good things that can really go askew. Like,
Yes.
think about food, like too much, too little, just our weird relationships we can have in it, the weird relationships that our society encourages us to have with it. And those two are the perfect pair to talk together. And I imagine that those also are things that have to do with the body as well.
Yeah, and that pairing comes up in scripture, right? As Paul's helping the Corinthians to think about the bodily life, right? Both food and sex are things that need to be addressed. And the pairing comes up throughout the Christian tradition as well, as Christians wrestle with how to think about discipleship in the bodily life. And again, as you said, two really good things that can also really go askew, right? And so worries about that gone wrongness also often pair sex and food. The comparison I want to make, though, in the book and in the course is how little I think we pair these things, at least in a certain way in our culture, in that we're quite careful about food. At least we think we ought to be, even if we're not often, right? We worry about a good diet, healthy eating, et cetera, et cetera. But we have a little bit of a cultural orthodoxy, which would say sex can't go wrong. Anything goes, anything is good. And I think that's interesting, right? Why on the one hand do we recognize the dangers of misuse, but on the other hand, we are in a place where we're often pushing against the idea that misuse can be harmful, right?
Yeah. So I'm tempted to go one of two ways here. And one of those is like the theological part. And then the other is like starting from where the issues that I see in real life, like as a elder millennial guy in my context in a pretty progressive city, and I guess I'll go that direction because you mentioned some things that made me think about it, and I feel like in my context, the greater outside of my Christian bubble, the kind of greater sexual ethic, and there is always a sexual ethic, whether it's
Always.
ours
Yeah.
or not, right? Yeah, yeah. I would say it's consent, and it's a bar of consent, and with and if consent is there, then it is good and right, and if it's not, it's not, and that's the bar, and that's the only bar. And I've thought, look, as a legality, I think that's awesome. Like, I think that's as good as we're gonna get, and that's probably what it should be, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
But it also gets sticky, because then
It's a good bar. It's not enough for human flourishing, really.
that's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you legally, you need a bar to protect people, right? So that's good. We're glad that it's there. But to think that it's kind of like ontologically correct is so strange to me, because for one thing, like, there's a magic day where you can all of a sudden consent, right? Where you couldn't, like, hours before. Like, that's weird,
The
right?
age of, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like the right age for baptism. Hard to determine. So
That's right. Well, and look, I mean, I think it's interesting, like, just biologically, like, our brains are not fully formed until, like, our early 20s, right? And so, and also, with, like, we just know that some people are more mature than others. And so, when people are, we could think that some people are able to make a decision because of their age when they're just not. And so I just think that this really begs for, like, a greater sexual ethic. As Christians, look, we have a source for that. And so, like, I guess I want to get back to the theology part. Like, if I could just erase my brain and start from scratch, like, where do we as Christians start? Like, where do we get our sexual ethic from?
Woo. I mean, the answer always has to be Jesus to these questions, right? And he's an interesting answer, given that he's not married and is not engaged in sexual relationships. He is, however, a sexed and gendered person, just as all persons, I think, are, right? And we do see in him the fullness of what it means to live an embodied life for the glory of God, for the love of God and the love of neighbor. And that's what sex, or not having sex, is about, right? It's about the fullness of the goodness of an embodied life, for the glory of God, for the love of God and neighbor. So it is there with Jesus that I think we have to begin. And then he helps us to connect to the whole of the biblical story, right? Starting in Genesis 1, which is often an important place for Christians in thinking about sexual ethics, and thinking all the way through to the end.
How do we, like, I think most of us would agree, starting with Jesus is always good. Jesus, I think we look for a lot of, like, thou shalt nots in the Bible, and there's not a ton, right? And so, like, what are some things that Jesus does, says, or acts that gives us clues to his sexual ethic that we can copy, we can follow?
I love that question, because there's a kind of easy trope out there that says that Jesus doesn't say much about sex, which is sort of true in one way, but also very not true in another way, right? And as much as, again, he's helping us in the body to direct our whole selves towards God, but he has some direct things to say as well. Some of those come in the area of teaching about marriage, right? He surprises really everyone with the radical nature of his insistence that marriage is for good and for real, and not to be broken, right? When he's so insistent on this, everyone is shocked. In his ancient context, just in ours, there are ways to end a marriage, and people assume that those ways must be good and right. And Jesus makes room for that because he knows that we live in a sinful world where people have to be protected. And so in the biblical record, he says, right, we should not end a marriage except for porneia, which is a big word, which means sexual sin. And I think we can read as, the spouse's betrayal of the other, whether directly sexually or in some other ways as well. Anyway, the main thing, though, he wants to say is this is for real. It's for good. A marriage is meant to be about fidelity for a whole life. And that points us big picture to God's relationship with us, right? To God's fidelity to his people. To Israel and to the church. And I love this bit where some Pharisees come to him with a question about marriage. And what they want to know is who's interpreting the divorce law rightly, right? So Moses says, don't get divorced. A man can't get divorced unless his wife is this, right? And the question is, what does this entail? Is it a very narrow set of things, only if she cheats on him, right? Or is it a very broad set of things? He doesn't like anything about her, he can get rid of her, right? And Jesus' answer to this question, the Pharisees think, will tell them whether he's liberal or conservative, right? Liberal, you can get rid of your wife pretty easy. Conservative, pretty hard to get rid of your wife, right? And he chooses neither. He says marriage is supposed to be forever. And the reason that this law permitting divorce exists is because we're under the condition of sin. Because of sin, it can be permitted. But he's not interested in haggling over what lets a man get rid of that wife, right? He's interested in fidelity. He's interested in this kind of picture of covenant relationship, which is so very beautiful. And then again, he does permit divorce in the case of porneia. But this seems to be turned not to letting men get rid of women they don't want around anymore, right? And towards instead the context of covenant fidelity. It protects spouses who've been deeply injured, right, by a partner. It acknowledges the need for that protection. But the basic presupposition is togetherness, right? And the goodness of that togetherness. And this flusters everyone. They don't expect him to refuse to weigh in and to change the conversation altogether. And he then takes us back to Genesis, right? The law permitting divorce is there because of sin, but this is not the way it was in the beginning, right? That's Jesus taking us to Genesis to point to, I think, the model there of the goodness of marriage and sexuality. It's a short model. That is, we don't have a ton of words, but it's one that shapes who he is and who we are as Christians as well.
That's really helpful. I don't want to spend a lot of time in a conversation about sexuality talking about divorce, but that did make me think of some stuff. It always makes me think of in The Blue Parakeet, Scott McKnight talks about how people have conversations about women in ministry by starting with the prohibitions, and he says it's like talking about talking about a conversation about Christian marriage by starting with the divorce, right? So here we are doing that, right?
Just hilariously or sadly, the biblical interpretation we tend to do here looks just like the Pharisees, right? So the Pharisees are looking at Deuteronomy and saying, what exactly is the condition for divorce? And that's almost the whole conversation about Jesus saying, don't get divorced except for porneia. A whole ton of what exactly does this mean? Is this allowed? Is that allowed? No, yes, what, right? Instead, again, of focusing it on that big picture portrait of covenant fidelity he's giving us, together again with protection for the injured, for the vulnerable.
Yeah. I guess it gets difficult pastorally when you've got friends or people in your church who get divorced or want to get a divorce, and it's like, there, like you said, Jesus allows for reasons for people to get divorced, and I think we've probably, like you kind of alluded to, we've probably interpreted that too rigidly. But at the same time, we don't want to take marriage lightly and be like, well,
Of course.
if it's hard, get out,
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, well, where's that line of like, well, it was really hard, so you might as well get out, or like, no, there were like really good reasons, and there, we should support you in that,
Adultery, abuse, right?
Yeah.
Get away. Yeah.
Well, and like, I don't know about you, but I feel like a lot of my peers, it seemed like there wasn't abuse and there wasn't adultery, but there was like somebody just like acted like they weren't married, like they were just roommates, and they didn't want to work on it, and they didn't want to participate. And you're like, I mean, it's almost, at some point you kind of feel like, I think you're just, by getting a divorce, you're just calling it what it really was, and like it's so tricky.
And when is that itself a kind of abuse and adultery, right? It is a hard question. I think, we try to simplify this by acting as though the conversation were this. I am the pastor, and I need to know the conditions under which I can say, yes, you may get a divorce, right? But that's almost none of the pastoral work. People have already decided to get a divorce. People have already gotten a divorce. People are working in a difficult marriage and need guidance, right? And none of that is, let's consult the list of rules and see if it checks off the right things or not. All of that is about actual people in relationships trying to love and love well. All of our churches are full of people who've been divorced and remarried, undergrounds that may or may not be permitted, right, biblically. But what are we going to do? Treat those marriages as though they're not marriages? I think no is the clear answer. And so the pastoral calling has to be, right, to step in and help people love where they are. And as you said, we don't want to treat marriage lightly. Jesus is very clear. It matters.
Yeah. That's a good word. Okay, I want to get back to like the porneia thing, because I feel like that kind of does a lot of heavy lifting in these conversations. And part of it is, I've thought through it. I think a lot of the problem with the like Jesus never said arguments is that we've ripped Jesus from his context and his history, right?
Yep.
And so part of just what I've gone to is like, well, what would a Jewish man think in his time and day, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And in the New Testament, there are endless clues that he thinks what a Jewish man would think in his time of day. That is, he has a Jewish sexual ethic, right? He believes in covenant marriage. He believes in faithfulness. He believes in not cheating or fornicating. We can talk about that in a minute.
Hey friends, if you're like me, you're always looking for ways to grow, whether it's in your faith, your leadership, or just as a human being. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about Seminary Now. It's an on-demand streaming platform packed with courses and resources from some of today's most trusted Christian thinkers and leaders. We're talking about names like Scott McKnight, Esau McCauley, and Ruth Haley Barton, and so many more. In fact, if you like this podcast, you're going to love Seminary Now, because there are a lot of similar voices there. Whether you want to dive into theology, church leadership, spiritual formation, or just enrich your personal faith journey, Seminary Now has you covered. One of the things I like most is that it's accessible, whether you've been to seminary or not. You can learn at your own pace, on your own schedule. So whether you're sitting in traffic, taking a walk, or winding down for the day, Seminary Now fits right into your life. So go to seminarynow.com, check it out, and use my code ShaneBlackshear25 for a 25% discount. Let Seminary Now help you grow deeper, lead better, and live fully into your calling. Trust me, you're going to love it. So this is a real, like, niche theology nerd question. It seems like when you go back and look at porneia in the Old Testament, it can get specific. And it seems like one of those things that would fall under that would be having sex while a woman is on her period. So I guess my question is, does Jesus have that in view? Is under one of the things, not the only thing, right? And then should we follow that? Like I said, really niche theology nerd question.
That is a niche question, yeah. So again, when you write your dissertation on theology of the body, this is the question you might have to answer in public. Be careful. Yeah. I'm kidding. I'm happy to answer any kinds of questions. So one of the complications here, of course, is that sexual ethics in the Old Testament is tied to the law. And there are various kinds of Old Testament law. And Christians generally think that some of those we continue to follow and some of them we don't, right? We generally think that we're not bound to the ceremonial law because Christians, our Gentile Christians, are not part of the temple system and the sacrificial system. We are grafted in, right? And it seems to me that those rules about sex and blood are generally tied to that ceremonial law. And so I think it's not surprising that contemporary Christians tend to not be particularly interested in that as a question. And I think that's probably just fine. It does bring up an interesting question, though, about what we pay attention to and what we don't in terms of the nitty-gritty of ceremonial law. Certainly for much of Christian history, I don't think we have as much record about how married couples were thinking about sex during menstruation, but we do have record that women were kept out of church after a birth, which is a period of bleeding, right, until a certain set amount of time had passed. Contemporary American Christians, as far as I know, don't do that, though you never know. Ethiopian Orthodox Christians do. They continue to practice churching in terms of a woman's time of bleeding after a birth. Okay, so I'm rambling, all of which is to say, here we're thinking about the law and how we think about pulling it into the Christian life. Jesus is the end of the law. That is the goal, right? Not the end as in throw it away, it doesn't matter, bye-bye, but the end as in the point of the whole thing. And so naturally, we're going to have to think about Old Testament law in light of all that, and we may not arrive at all the same conclusions. I'll just say one more thing, and then maybe you can see if you want me to say more. But sometimes these laws to us about women not having sex while menstruating or not having sex after a childbirth, sometimes those might seem to us to be prudish, right, or anti-sex. But there's an argument to be made that they're very much there for a woman's kind of protection, right? For a kind of space away, and particularly after childbirth, right? Space for healing and so on. So I don't think we should be too quick to say, look at these anti-sex laws in the Old Testament. To order something, that is to arrange it in proper order, is not the same as to say that something is bad, right? And I think that's what's going on there, is a kind of ordering for the sake of healthy life together. Again, not that I'm arguing that Christians should be bound to these particular laws. Oh.
Yeah. Just the Old Testament laws in general are something I'm kind of always wrestling with, but I think I'm coming to the understanding that they are paradigmatic for us, meaning, it's the thing under the thing. And I think it would probably do Christians good to kind of wrestle with like what might be the thing under the thing there for us in this situation. I'm hesitant to say what that is, but yeah.
One of these things might be, I'm just trying something out here, right? But might be this. Many Christians in the U.S. today, in an effort to reclaim sex as a good thing, right, try to do that reclaiming by erasing all boundaries and borders, right? Sometimes in a particularly male-centered way, as though marriage were to be an endless sexual paradise for men, right? And perhaps this kind of law is there to say that's not really the whole point, right? There's a time for everything, even in a marriage. There's time for everything. And having taught sexuality to eager undergraduates for many years, most of whom were unmarried and eagerly anticipating marriage, and hoping marriage would be an endless paradise of pleasure, right? I can tell you that the looks on young men's faces when I said, doctors recommend waiting 6 weeks after a birth were not happy looks, right? They thought they were waiting now and would never have to wait again once they were married. And marriage, of course, is sacrifice, just as singleness is. So.
Yeah. So, so I think that you're kind of alluding to something that I really appreciated about your book and about the course, which is all these conversations kind of they center around the controversial stuff. They center around LGBTQ orientations or divorce, like we were talking about, or just like the rules, like tell me the rules, the boundaries, right? And it seems like almost at no point do we get at what is sex for? Like a real theology of sex, not just what can I do and what can I not do. And I feel like that's what's missing. So, like my parents' generation, they really had to deal with like their peers getting divorced or getting divorced themselves. You go by, time goes by, and obviously LGBTQ conversations have come to the forefront. They were always there. Those folks were always around. Come to the forefront. My generation, we're dealing with our peers like opening their marriages and polyamory and stuff like that. And it's really made me realize, and I'm talking about like purity culture church kids, right? It's because we weren't ever given a good theology of sex. We didn't know what it was for. So probably a question I should have opened with, what's sex for, Dr. Jones?
Yeah. I did write this book and teach this course at seminary now with the hope of giving some answers to that question, right? And with the conviction that it's a lot harder to answer the controversial questions without some kind of solid basis. And I do think, what you're being told not to do has changed, right? At one point it was purity culture, don't have sex. At another point, the church conversation shifted almost entirely to an anti-LGBTQ conversation. Now, as you suggest, it's shifting again into just much more complicated sets of questions about what a healthy sexual life looks like. Anyway, sex is it's for Jesus.
All right.
That is, it's for participating in the fact that he is the image of the invisible God and that we have been created in that image in order to show the glory of God to one another, right? And so whatever we're doing with our bodies, and in terms of sex, whether that's singleness and celibacy or marriage and fidelity, our bodies are meant to be an image of God's goodness and fidelity. I don't think it's an accident that there's, throughout the scriptures, an analogy drawn between sex and marriage as we experience it as humans and the divine human relationship, right? What's the main thing about the divine human relationship? It's faithful, right? And that's why we don't have sex outside of marriage, because our bodies are icons of faithfulness. Now, sex is for more than that, too. The Christian tradition generally says it's for three things. Faithfulness, which is really like bonding between the couple. Procreation, which people are surprised by these days, but there it is. And sacrament, which means something like helping us draw closer to God. I think by being discipled and sanctified in the way we live the bodily life. Pleasure, too, I think, is part of that faithfulness, right? Which draws a couple together. But big picture, I think sex is about being an emblem of who Jesus is, an emblem of his faithfulness. In a world where faithfulness is often hard to see, what a gift to be able to see it lived out in the bodily lives of Christians.
Well, I think that really reframes things, because if it's about Jesus, it's about faithfulness to Jesus and being an emblem of Jesus. I think that's the word you use, which I really like. I think that has implications for what sex looks like, even between in a covenant marriage relationship. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a while back, and I was saying, like, I don't know if this makes me prudish or progressive, but like, I really have a problem when with things like violence in sex, or things that are just, and even like simulated violence. Like, I think like we really need to examine our hearts when like the idea of violence sexually excites us, right?
I think so too. And we've been socialized in a world where violence is eroticized. I think back several years ago, right, to the Shades of Grey phenomenon, right? Those books that were so popular, and which brought that conversation to the forefront. And yeah, I don't think eroticized violence is healthy. And I think, in as much as we've been shaped that way, we need to be aware of it and to try to keep that kind of thinking outside of our marriages. But again, there are a lot rules even within marriage for healthiness and happiness, not for prudishness, right? But for flourishing. I interrupted you, Shane.
No, that's exactly where I was going with that. And I think it's another place where kind of just giving us the rules went wrong, like especially in purity culture, because it was like, all this stuff outside of marriage bad, anything inside of marriage. That may have been implicitly, communicated, not explicitly, but that's like the gist that most of us got, was that, once you're married, it's all fine. And even beyond.
And don't worry, Christians aren't prudes. You can do it all, right? And
Yeah.
I think, finding those lines, difficult conversations for couples, all of that. But again, there have to be lines for the sake of love. I interrupted you again.
No, that was perfect.
Yeah.
Because also, and not even just like getting into violence, but then just consent has to happen inside of marriage too. And I'm not like, yes, like marital rape, but also like the things you want to do, like you both need for it to be like godly sex. Like you both need to be wanting to do those things. And I'm even just talking about like, I feel like most of the time married couples' libidos do not match up perfectly, right? And so, I think
that's the story I hear. Yep.
yeah, right. And I think traditionally, like the way we've handled that was like, well, generally, woman, you're going to need to do this more often than you want. But it's never the opposite. It's never like, man, you're going to need to put your desires aside, or, whatever aside, and, practice mutual submission. Right. And so I think there's a lot of like basically unexplored. I know there are people that talk about this, obviously, but it's not been this has been like a real kind of side conversation that we have in the conversation of sexuality, which
right.
probably
Not married don't, married do, but really we need to talk about flourishing.
That's right. And it's probably more something that the majority of the population would need to deal with, right? And wrestle with.
Absolutely. And I think, God's good intention for us in marriage is consensus in our sexual life, right? Not just consent, but consensus, togetherness, mutual wanting, and mutual desire. And that does require communication about, are we both happy with this or that, right? And not just do whatever your husband wants so he'll be satisfied, right? And even that narrative is very dangerous. It may be more common that men have more desire than women, but it certainly can go the other way, right? And then you have men feeling ashamed because men are supposed to want it all the time. And what if they don't? And I mean, there's all kinds of conversations we're just not allowed to have because of these assumed gender roles. And we need to be able to have. Desire ebbs and flows, right? For all kinds of reasons in a long, healthy marriage. And you have to be able to talk about that as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that just talking about it is a really hard thing, even sometimes within marriage. I really have this conviction that like whatever someone is into, they should be able to bring that to their spouse. Now they can and should have a separate conversation whether that thing's good for them or not, right? But we should be able to put it all on the table and say, here's where it is, and then we can have that conversation of like, well, is that God honoring, and does that bring, is that what we're talking about here, like godly sex? I need a different term for that. What
healthy, happy?
Sure. Yeah, I like that.
I like healthy and happy. Yeah,
that's good.
Which are things God wants for us. And I think it's important to say here too, in this age of ubiquitous pornography, that there are scripts that come from pornography, which are about violence and patriarchy and doing sex acts that may not feel healthy and happy for everyone. And because of those scripts getting into the heads of so many people, it's going to be all the more important in marriages for people to be able to talk about what they do and don't want and why. And not importing scripts from pornography is, I think, a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, I think we could spend a whole hour talking about that. Like, I am just worried about like the effects of the proliferation of pornography on society.
Hugely, yeah.
It's like, I just feel like we're in the midst of a train wreck, but like, I feel like it's just going to get worse when you've got, goodness, like you've got like middle school and junior high kids who are addicted to hardcore pornography. Like, this is not going to end well.
Yeah. I just saw a study, interviews with sexually active single 20s, right? Of how many people are encountering dates who want to strangle them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That is coming straight from porn. It wasn't something that most people were encountering 20 years ago. I'm not saying it never happened, but the high rise of this, right, idea and behavior is straight from porn, and it's harmful in all kinds of ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the people are conditioning themselves for that to be the bar of arousal. Like, to be aroused, I have to do that X and Y. Like, oh my gosh, it's so dangerous in so many different ways.
Or for that to be something one has to agree to, right, in order to be not a prude.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, just so disastrous. I wanted to talk with you about just maleness and femaleness, and that's something that you bring up early on in the Seminary Now course. And boy, I have to say, like, I don't have gender dysphoria or anything like that, but I've really wrestled with like a theology of like, other than the biological part, like what is maleness and femaleness? And it gets so tricky because once you try to define that, then you're like, well, anybody who doesn't match that is not being male or female, right? And like, I just feel like we don't have a lot of good, robust theology about that.
I suspect that trying to define it beyond the biological actually creates a lot of gender dysphoria.
Oh, that's interesting.
We try to define these very narrow boxes, right? And I think the boxes should be, in fact, quite broad. I'm not even sure we need a beyond the biological, right? God made us male and female. That means there's bodily differentiation, and that's good. I don't think we have to go on to say, and boys like football and girls like sewing, right? It's not only not a requirement, but it can then be limiting in a way that suggests that maleness and femaleness is not good, right, or not enough, and has to be played out according to cultural scripts, which may just be not fitting for everybody, right? Maybe a lot of guys like football, but some don't, and that's fine. But they may be more than not fitting. They might be actually harmful. If you don't like football, you're not the right kind of man. You're not a good man, right? I'm being kind of silly here, but then we have all kinds of problems, emerging. So
Yeah.
maybe bodies are enough.
Yeah, I think that that's really helpful. Maybe bodies are enough. I do wish there were conversations about like, okay, generally men have, it's like something crazy, 10 to 20% the 10 to 20 times the testosterone in their bodies that women have.
Bodies are enough is a really complicated thing to say, right? It's not just, oh, we have two kinds of genitals. It's every dimension probably of our lives, like testosterone. Go on.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say like I think there's like okay, so there's like two conversations. One's like, okay, man, you've got more testosterone, so you need to act and behave this way, right? But I think there's another side that's like, okay, men, you have 10 to 20 times the testosterone, but not all men, so we can't say anything about that.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, but maybe like the most of us that are need to know what to do with all that testosterone, right? Like I feel like those conversations don't happen a lot because we're afraid of who we're going to leave out, and so then we don't say anything about it at all,
And I think a way to get at that is to say bodies are maybe enough, and also part of what it means to be male and female, to be sexed and gendered, right, is to participate in social realities and social constructs, all right, in which we do have certain expectations of men and of women, and in which we need to navigate those well and think about them in a healthy, holy way, right? And in which it may well be the case that many men X or many women Y, right? I didn't mean to use chromosome numbers there. I was just using variables, and that is something we have to deal with socially, even if it isn't true of every single man or every single woman. And I think part of our conversation about gender right now is so individualistic, right? To the point where, right, you hear people suggest that there are as many genders as there are people. I mean, fine, there are as many people as there are people, right? But that doesn't let us deal with the fact that we live in a social reality with certain expectations. Some healthy, some not, some holy, some sinful, all of which are governing how we relate to each other, and which we need to be able to think about well. No.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Well, I think one last thing I want to talk to you about, we've mentioned it here and there, but like, it's really hard to have a conversation about sexuality without talking about purity culture, and for good reason. I'm just curious, did you grow up, were you a youth group kid in the purity culture movement?
I was. I have a kind of slightly different than some people relationship with this, I think. I was a mainline church kid, but also a youth group kid in a way that overlapped with mainline church stuff. So I think for the large part, yes. I mean, I definitely heard a lot of that teaching, and to some extent participated in it. So, yeah. Were you?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Big time. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. And I say that, like, let me be clear. I hear some other people's stories and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was really shielded from the worst of it.
No, there's some really bad stories.
Yeah. I would say like it was probably a little more of like a soft purity culture. And there's a lot I can even say I appreciated about that, like, and I feel like for instance, like the teaching about sex that I got was like pretty egalitarian, like it wasn't like boys will be boys, but girls need to behave. Like it was pretty egalitarian. Now, when we had modesty conversations, that was not egalitarian, but Yeah, I think just again hearing the horror stories, I'm like, oh my goodness, I was saved from a lot of
Yeah, I was too.
the
Yeah.
worst of that. So just real quick, like what? Because I think a lot of time I hear people talking about purity culture, and I'm like, I think you're just talking about a Christian sexual ethic.
Right. Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
encounter that?
I do. So I think sometimes in the effort to get rid of the bad parts of purity culture, which are there, right? A kind of legalism and disgust for sexuality and so on, right? But in effort to get rid of that, you see people jettisoning all of a Christian sexual ethic. I I may just be old. Maybe I'm progressive. I don't know. But I do think sex belongs within marriage. I think that's the healthiest, holiest, happiest way for us to flourish as human beings. And it's the way we tell the story of God's faithfulness. So we need to get rid of or to question these harmful aspects of purity culture. While also talking about what a Christian sexual ethic looks like. And I do think we're at a turning point where many Christian young people are ready to throw out the idea of sex belonging in marriage. We need to still be able to talk about that.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I don't think I encountered the argument until, like, I don't know, in the last 10 years that the idea of marriage or sex only belonging in marriage was like a recent invention, like historically recent, like a Victorian era kind of thing. But you said, and I know in the chorus you say, like, it's the testimony of Scripture that this is where sex belongs.
And it's what Christians have expected from the beginning. I mean, if you look at an ancient Roman sexual ethic, sex belonged only in marriage if you were a rich woman, a citizen woman. Sex belonged wherever you wanted it if you were a citizen man. And if you were a slave, you didn't have any choice in the matter, right? Christians come in and say, sex belongs only in marriage for everybody, and here's why. And they don't consider the victimization of slaves to be an impurity, but they do consider it something that we should stop. We should stop using the bodies of slaves, right? Mostly for the pleasure of citizen men. Anyway, in the first century, most Gentiles would not have expected men to keep sex in marriage, but Christians did. Jewish men, I think, would have expected the same. And that has often been the case even throughout Christendom. These rules have been applied more to women than to men because they've been more about assuring paternity than they have been about holiness, right? But Christians want to say, no, the rules, and as much as they're rules, are about holiness, and they're for all of us. So the fact that sexual ethics are for men is, I think, one of the most radical things the New Testament says.
Yeah, right. Because both Jesus and Paul really seem to hammer that home, that, like, the men too is kind of their...
Yeah. And there seems to be in our contemporary world an effort to say, we always thought not the men, let's say not the women either, but maybe we really need to go in the other direction and see that this is not about policing paternity. It's about healthy, happy, holy flourishing.
Is there something else to, like, my understanding, like, the marriages didn't have ceremonies as we know them today, but part of entering into marriage was like consummating it. And so it's kind of, you're almost kind of saying, like, so when you have, like, sex is for consummating a marriage, so when you have sex outside of marriage, it's like you're forging a bond that you have no intention of carrying out.
I think that's right. Marriage in part is a way to say, in public, to your church, to your parents, we're having sex.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And the public nature of that involves, or should involve, some protections and some commitments that are simply not there without the public vow. right? The church law has always said marriage involves two things: consent, which is the public vow, and consummation. And you can't say just one of those is enough, though many have tried. So.
Yeah. Well, this was so good. I would like the course specifically. I thought, man, I wish that like if we could have done away with all of like the bad resources in the 80s and 90s and just had this course, like that would be, we would be so far ahead right now. But I thought it was so good, and it was something that it's theologically robust, but like it's not anything that you couldn't give to a teenager either. Like you would.
I hope that's the case.
Yeah, totally. So great. And then I would really encourage people to get the book as well, which is Faithful, a Theology of Sex, right? Yeah. And I think that I can't highly recommend that enough. And then also, I want to give a shout out to Practicing Christian Doctrine, your other book, one that we used as a textbook in your class. So feel like I've read it cover to cover at this point. So good. I feel like everyone throw away your bad systematic theology books and just get Practicing Christian Doctrine.
Oh, many thanks. Coming soon to Seminary Now, a 4-credit course in Christian doctrine using that book.
Oh, that's excellent. Cool.
So you can grab a first seminary credit through Seminary Now and then take that on to a seminary degree if you're interested in enrolling later.
That's perfect. And for anybody listening, we'll have links to Seminary Now, specifically this course, and just if you want to sign up or check it out or do the free trial or that sort of thing, check that out. We'll put links in the show notes and all that good stuff. So, Dr. Jones, thank you so much for being with me. It's been so good to talk to you.
It's fun to talk. Thanks for having me, and great to have a conversation.
That's all for today, friends. I hope you found something helpful. Remember to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it. You can support Seminary Dropout by going to supportseminarydropout.com. Remember, all past episodes, 200 plus of them, can be found at seminarydropout.com. You can find me on almost all social media channels. My handle is ThatShaneB. All right, friends, we'll see you next time.